Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to IU's Virtual Institute for Advanced Study and the first of our lectures on democracy and collections. This semester, we are doing those in conjunction with the IU Themester theme of democracy, and we're really glad that you all have joined us. And I am particularly glad that Hilary Fleck has joined us today, has agreed to present. Hilary is the collections manager at the Monroe County History Center, where she has worked since 2015. And before that, she has a bachelor's in history and art history from the University of Evansville. And she has a master's in art history from IU, which she earned in 2015. So she has a lot of varied background that feeds into the things that she is going to talk about today. Hilary has graciously offered to answer questions as she goes along, and you can put those in the chat or the Q&A, and a couple of us are monitoring that. But if you also want to hold those until the end, then we'll have more discussion then. So again, thank you, Hilary, for joining with us. Thank you all for joining us. We hope that you will join us for future talks as well. And if you have a topic that you'd like to suggest, please email us at ias@indiana.edu. We'd love to hear from you. So Hilary, without further ado, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you to IAS for having me today. It's really exciting to talk about this overarching project the History Center is currently working on. So I would like to talk about community representation and the Monroe County History Center. It's something that we have struggled with in the past, and so I'm going to talk about that, but then what we're doing to sort of fix that situation. So next slide, please. So who are we? A lot of times I do need to do a little bit of explaining of like, what is the Monroe County History Center and where are we? So we are located in the historic Carnegie Library, which was built in 1917. There's also an addition onto the building that was done in the 90s. But our mission is to collect and preserve and foster a deeper understanding and appreciation of Monroe County's history. So I know that Bloomington is pretty much saturated with museums. There's a lot of different things to do, and that's really wonderful for the community. But how we differentiate ourselves is that we are the museum and the institution that focuses specifically on Monroe County history. We have a number of different exhibits. We do rotating exhibits each year, and then as well as our permanent gallery, so that changes much less frequently, but has the same topics. So like a military exhibit, we have a log cabin, a sports gallery, a school room. So those exhibits don't change as often, whereas the stories and the artifacts inside them do. Then we also have a genealogy library where a lot of people from around the country really can come and research their family history. But our vision, like I've highlighted on the screen, is really to be the foremost authority and storytellers of the history and culture of Monroe County, Indiana. So we are really striving to be the go-to people when you have any sort of question on Monroe County history, and then we can either answer that question for you or direct you to the correct resources to answer those questions. So that is what we strive to do. That is what our mission and our vision are. So it's the goal that we reach for every single day. So can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So who are we really? And so our mission is to tell the history of Monroe County, and that means the entire history of Monroe County, a complete picture of Monroe County's history. But these pictures, and the few on the next slide, are pictures of our galleries from 2017. And that's not really the history that we're telling every day. So these are from our permanent gallery displays. So not our rotating temporary exhibits. These are exhibits that are mainly up all of the time. So there's a Gentry Brothers Circus exhibit, the Seward Foundry exhibit, Circus Tarsian, then there's Bill Cook and RCA companies, the limestone industry. There's a picture of lockers, which is in our sports gallery. Can you go to the next slide, please? On this side, we have the Showers Brothers Furniture Company. We have the inside of our log cabin display, and then in the corner, we have a women's work display. And these displays, in 2017, there was not a single Black person depicted in the galleries, which was upsetting. We're working on this, but this is something like, we claim to represent all of Monroe County, and we clearly don't. So we don't represent different stories, different experiences of even in the white community. So not every white woman was a homemaker, and it's, some of these displays were stuck in a certain time. Obviously, I mean, with the log cabin, that's a given, but even one of our largest donors, Gail Cook, she grew up in a log cabin, and so she knows that log cabins were not just used in the 1800s, and then when it hit 1900, we're done, log cabins no more. Log cabins can be interpreted through a period of time, but our displays were really stuck, and not in a good way. So next slide, please. So the history of our own building, our own location, was also not displayed anywhere. So the public library, the Carnegie Public Library, was built in 1917. And what was here before that was the colored school. And we do have a historical marker that's out on the front lawn that talks about the colored school, but we didn't, in 2017, we did not tell that story inside the building itself. So the colored school, before there were desegregated schools, the colored school was the place where all of the colored children went to learn. And so that was on this physical space where the library was. And then it was demolished in 1915. And then the Banneker Center, the Banneker School, was built, which is now today the Banneker Center after desegregation. But so we had a Black history at our physical space, and we weren't telling that story. So that was pointed out to us very clearly in 2017. We had a community member, she's an elderly Black woman, and she brought her grandchildren to the History Center because she loves history. And she made a comment to us that she found it very disparaging that her family and her family's history and the Black community's history wasn't represented here. So her children had a good time, but it's an issue when you don't see yourself reflected in what we claim to be your community's museum and historical institution. So we're basically ignoring an entire population of the community we claim to serve. So that was really a wake-up call, and we invited that person to later join our board of trustees, which she did, and we started an African American history committee. And so to look specifically into these issues of inserting more of that history into our gallery and making sure that it's there, and that it's being considered when we discuss exhibit ideas. But that in 2017, that was really not the case. That was not something that we focused on. Can you go to the next slide, please? Another instance, I guess, that you can say that there's a glaring gap in our displays is the history of women in Monroe County. And this was very clear to me in 2019 when we were gearing up for the suffrage centennial. And our library, our research library collections and our physical collections and of the museum didn't have anything really to do with suffrage. And so that was a problem. And it was really discussed as like, oh, well, then I guess women around here just didn't really participate in that. And I was like, that is very wrong. Just because we don't have that information, we should not make that assumption that these women didn't do that, that they didn't care about something that directly affected them as much as suffrage did. So I was able to dig deeper and actually do research in newspapers and archives, and found that indeed there were many, and I have nearly 40 women named in newspaper articles that were part of a suffrage organization or a franchise league and served in some sort of capacity to spread the word of suffrage from the 1870s to the up to 1920. So we have like a 50-year history of Monroe County women participating in this, and we didn't have that represented at all in our collection. And so that's another issue. And it goes back to the women's work corner of our gallery, is that you know, I don't see that as my history of, you know, like it's just very difficult that that was the only real shot into the life of a Monroe County woman, that we see that she's a homemaker, and this is her laundry list for the week. And it's like, that's not realistic to what everybody's experience was. So we really need to step up our efforts and make sure that, you know, we talk about these things. Next slide, please. So obviously this year with the Black Lives Matter marches and unfortunately all of the murders of Black men and women in the country, it's really coming to a head. And I think I like to be optimistic and think that this momentum is really building to have institutional to address systemic racism at really every level of society. And that also includes museums. The murder of Trayvon Martin in 2013 really caused a lot of the beginnings of these discussions of diversity and making sure that that's included in the history that we're telling every day in our institutions, and just making sure that these lives that we say should matter are displayed like they matter. So it's really it's just important to address this systemic racism that we have in our institutions. And museums are not immune to that. I feel like a lot of I wouldn't say misinformation, but there's a misconception that museums tell the facts as it is, unbiased, and that's so very much not true, because there is a person who creates these exhibits and writes the text and arranges the pieces, the artifacts, the artwork. Everything is from a person's or people point of view. So it's definitely very much not neutral. And our museum is also created, and we have an exhibits manager who designs and interprets and creates the displays of our museum. And so it's definitely not neutral. Next slide, please. So since 2013, I think that a lot of, obviously a lot of museums have done a lot of work and introspection. And I think the larger museums also have started a lot of diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion initiatives. And so in 2015, the Andrew Mellon Foundation did a staff survey of just museum staff. And you can see the pie chart that I have on there. It's really 84% is white, non-Hispanic. And I fall into that category. And that really helped. It really goes to show you that it's really a white institution, even though America as a country is trending much more diverse, and it will only get more diverse. And we really need to understand that if we are to remain relevant, we need to be diverse as well. So in 2016, the American Alliance of Museums launched a DEAI awards that individuals can win, organizations, and then also programs can win that advance diversity initiatives, that diverse exhibits. And the first organization to win the award was the Minnesota Historical Society for an exhibit that they did about the indigenous Hmong population. I think it's Hmong, sorry. But it's an indigenous, an immigrant community in Minnesota. And so it was an amazing exhibit that had so much community participation that it was really definitely deserved the award. But it set a sort of precedent of this is how we can engage this community, this minority community in Minnesota, and really learn about them and learn their history and help them to tell their history. So the Minnesota Historical Society has since then used this exhibit as a sort of teaching tool for other museums to share, this is how we did this, and this is the framework that you can use to do this in your own communities. There's also a recently published book, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Inclusion in Museums. So it's several essays by museum professionals about DEAI initiatives. And so that's become a textbook for professionals. And then there's also a really interesting Instagram account that I follow called Change the Museum. And this account posts anonymous quotes from museum professionals who have had experienced racism in museums in their jobs, from their administrative professionals, from their leaders, their CEOs, and policies from museums that they're working at that are not inclusive. It's more of calling out these museums anonymously, so that we can come to understand that there's still a long way to go. And just because a museum may post a Black Lives Matter support statement on their website doesn't mean that they support the people of color that they hire. So it's a really eye-opening Instagram account to myself. I've learned a lot from the account, and the account really challenges people to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk and do the work. It's not going to happen overnight, but museums shouldn't say one thing and do another. Next slide, please. So diversity is not really just we should do it because it's right. It's also a matter of survival, because America is getting more and more diverse. So these are estimates from the Census Bureau for Monroe County. And so you can see that we are predominantly white. We are 86% white, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a Black, Asian, Hispanic, and multiracial demographics and communities. So we should reflect that then in what we have here at the History Center, because we are here to serve our community. And if we don't reflect our community and we don't have diverse institutional staff or exhibits or programs, then we're not going to be relevant and we're not going to be influential. And unfortunately, at this time, we are not seen as an asset to our Black community, and that's troubling. And that's something that we are actively working towards, but we're not there yet. So keeping these demographics in mind, it's helping us to target where we need to go and to drive our actions and our exhibit calendar, our program calendar. It's really just giving us more of a target to hit, is like, look, we really need to be doing these things. Next slide, please. So in the winter of 2017-2018, we received a Wiley Family Foundation grant for $6,000. And the grant helped us assess what we looked like. So you can see like those pictures from the permanent galleries in 2017 that I showed at the beginning of the presentation, is we are very white. And that's not the only history that matters in Monroe County. So we really wanted help to address this and to find a way forward. So this foundation grant allowed us to set up a focus group of African-American community leaders to go through our museum, like as it was, and share their opinions. What do you think? What do you think of us as an organization? What do you think of the exhibits? What could we do better? All of these things. It allowed us to hire an intern to go around and specifically assess the museum exhibits and identify areas for improvement, such as our sports exhibit didn't have a single African-American in it, but hello, George Taliaferro. So it's the intern went exhibit by exhibit and worked to find individuals that we could put into the exhibits to make it more, to tell Monroe County history, but also to make it more of an inclusive history. And then the grant also supported the Breaking the Color Barrier, Bloomington's first exhibit that was about Monroe County African Americans, the first in their professions or positions. So the first firefighter, the first county clerk, the first city councilor, the first professor, the first, all of these first police department officer. It's a lot of just, the whole gallery was just filled with these firsts. We also took the information and the photographs that we gathered from this exhibit, and it's now an online exhibit that's accessible on our website called Breaking the Color Barrier, Bloomington's First. And so you can go through all of the individuals that were included in that exhibit. And then as research develops and we find more individuals that need to be included in this list, we can include them in our online exhibit list of Bloomington's First. So another key takeaway from the focus group and the intern was that we can do a lot more to highlight the difficult history of our community. The Breaking the Color Barrier exhibit really celebrated the first African Americans, so it celebrated a more triumphant history of this African American community, but we can really, we can tell the difficult history as well. We don't have to only tell the rosy side of and applaud them. We can tell the difficult history, which also takes place right here. We, the Carnegie Library removed the colored students from the school and moved them to Banneker, and then took this plot of land, which we have been told was gifted to the Black community. So there's really, and then put a library on it. And that was, from what I understand, that was not taken very well by the Black community. And I can understand why. but like our own physical history is difficult, and so that's not something that we should shy away from. That's something that we should definitely tell in the galleries, because that is Monroe County's history. We also can do a lot more to develop trust among our Black community members, and developing that is really important to preserving the artifacts and the stories that they have, and then on the flip side, being ourselves being seen as a repository for these items. The Breaking the Color Barrier exhibit was nearly entirely made of loans. So that tells me that we don't have these items in our collection, represented here in our collection. We had to ask for them. And so we are not currently seen as a place that they feel comfortable giving their artifacts to, which is something that we need to work on. And that's not going to happen overnight. This exhibit was in 2018, and so it's still a work in progress of building that trust with the community, and yeah, being seen as part of their community and representative of their community. So these special exhibits like Breaking the Color Barrier are great. That's what we heard from the focus group, that these special exhibits are great, but we really need to make more of an effort to represent all parts of the community throughout all of the permanent exhibits. So rather than the Breaking the Color Barrier was a temporary exhibit that was up for about 5 months, and that information was then put online, so it's up in perpetuity, but that information also needs to be in our permanent galleries. We also need to, so it's up all of the time. It's not just the special one time, yay, we did it, moving on. We need to have them represented throughout our galleries. Next slide, please. So this is a photograph of our Breaking the Color Barrier exhibit in June of 2018. And we had a really great turnout from the African American community. And that was really amazing. It was refreshing to see that they came to this exhibit and saw themselves represented in this exhibit and celebrated in this exhibit, but we haven't had turnout like that since. So that kind of tells you something. But we're working on it, and we've taken the advice from the focus group to include more Black stories throughout our galleries, and so we have made some changes. So on to the next slide, please. So here are some of just a few permanent gallery additions. So James Hopkins, he was included in the Bloomington First exhibit. He was the first African-American firefighter hired by the Bloomington Fire Department. And so we have his boots, his fireman's boots on the fire department exhibit. And then Gene Shipp, who is, he's over 100 years old and he still fits into his uniform. He's a very thin man, but he is represented, and we included more images of military, Black military veterans in our exhibits. So we have Gene Shipp, and our Lester Yeager is another veteran who's featured in our galleries. Next slide, please. Another place where we feature a new diverse exhibit is in our sports gallery. So this, the graphic that's on the right is the graphic before you enter the sports gallery room. And so we have women, African Americans, all different kinds of sports, teams, all different kinds. On the inside as well, we have Julie Kedzie, who's a UFC fighter, which is really amazing. Jill Watson, who is an ice skater. Jennifer Brinegar, who was a swimmer. So we have a lot of female representation in the sports room as well. So that's really exciting, is that we're taking these suggestions And we're working to incorporate them into what we've already got, and add these items in from that were originally loans, and adding them into our collection so that they are represented in future exhibits whenever we want to do something with them. Next slide, please. So for our future plans, so that's where we're at right now, is that that was some pictures that I took of our galleries this week. So that's currently where we're at. And our future plans are we're going to do a COVID oral history project. And this will include interviewing a diverse group of residents about their experiences during the pandemic. We do not have the capacity for like a call out situation, but we are going to address specific solicit interviews, I guess, with specific individuals in the community. So, I mean, like big people such as like the mayor, people at the health department, those, you know, city council members, that sort of thing. But then we're also going to interview people like frontline workers, nurses, grocery store workers, teachers, just families. How have they been impacted by the pandemic? And so we're looking to take more of a representative sample of Monroe County residents rather than do a sort of call out situation. So, and we're fronting the idea of diversity and making sure that who is part of our community is represented in this project. We're also working on, because I'm the collections manager and I'm in charge of all of the artifacts of the collection. I'm working on correcting our database and making sure that we're using subject tags in artifacts in the collection. So like African American, Asian American, making sure that we have these tags so that we can find them and just make sure that we have representative objects and artifacts in the collection, and to get more of an assessment of what are we missing, and then going on to the third point is actively seeking and collecting those artifacts and stories that we are missing, like how we were talking in 2017 where we didn't have hardly anything from the Black community. We didn't have anything on women that were not homemakers and part of the suffrage movement. And so working to first identify what do we have so that we can identify, okay, what do we not have, and work to add that into our collection, just so that we have a more representative collection and we can work to build that trust with these communities. And then we're also working to continue to add more minority voices into our galleries and making sure that they're represented. We really don't want to have another family come into the galleries like we did in 2017 and not feel like they're represented and not feel like their history is here and feel like maybe their history and their experiences aren't welcome here. And that's not what we stand for. That's not part of our mission or our vision. And so we're really working to fix that and make sure that everybody is welcome here, but it's not going to happen overnight. And so that's something that we're really working towards. So yeah, so thank you all for having me, and I would love to answer any questions you all had, or about the presentation or about where we're going with our project.
Thank you so much, Hilary. This was great. I appreciate the opportunity to hear more about what's going on, both in the galleries and behind the scenes. Thank you for sharing that. So it occurs to me that I failed to introduce myself at the beginning because I was so excited to introduce you, and that's not a terrible thing. But now, for those who don't know me, I will say that I'm Suzanne Godby Inglesby, and I am the Associate Director at the Institute for Advanced Study. And also my personal research interest is in museums. That's where my work and background has been, in museums, archives, and libraries. So that is part of the reason that I had proposed this talk series, and I'm excited about it. And I'm really excited that Hilary kicked it off for us. So I am going to take privilege and ask the first question while other people are thinking about any questions that they might have to ask, if that's okay with you, Hilary.
Yeah, sure.
So one of the things about being a local museum is you have a sort of specific mandate, right, to focus on Monroe County, and you can do that in a broad number of ways, and you've shared several of those with us. So in some sense, that's helpful, right? It's kind of like really clear what the museum is about. But as you've said, there are lots and lots of stories that need to be included in that. And it occurs to me that smaller institutions of all types in some ways have some agility that maybe really large institutions, and I'm thinking really large, like Smithsonian's, you know, multiple museum complex kinds of institutions.
Sure.
Takes them a little bit longer, but in some ways you are local and agile. But on the other hand, there's the resource and the size issue there too. And so these are kind of two ends of a spectrum of things that work for or against you. And I wondered if you could say maybe just a little bit about your experience with that, you know, what that's like. You recounted to us the family who came in and you were able to specifically engage the person who gave you feedback. So you both, that person had a really direct experience with you and getting response, and you were able to draw that person in and draw on their expertise and their experience. Example of how it can be very personal and local and kind of a relatively quick sort of a impact.
Yeah, so exactly. It is like this double-edged sword. So specifically with collections and responding to those sorts of incidences, like we can react pretty quickly. Like we don't have a large procedural, like we don't have like our exhibits calendars planned out like 6 years in advance. So we could react to something that's happening and work it into our exhibits if that's the way we wanted to go. And with the collections as well, it's like we could, like with the pandemic, we could solicit donations and get anything and everything in the door, but because we're not the Smithsonian, we have a finite amount of storage space. And so I cannot take everything in. And that's something that we discussed with a COVID project, is that how are we going to manage this? Because larger places like the Indiana Historical Society are doing a call out for stories and photographs and everything related to COVID that's happening in your lives. And that's wonderful. But we don't have the infrastructure to handle something like that, of just anything and everything. Like, what if every Monroe County resident like submitted something? Like, we just don't have the space or the digital space for something like that. So we decided that we were going to do a more, I guess, a more select sampling of Monroe County residents, while still trying to be as diverse and representative as possible. We recognize that we are just a small staff of 6 people. Like, we don't know everybody in Monroe County. So we're also including that into how we make decisions of who to interview. So we're trying to recognize our own bias in that, but then you just have to recognize that our resources versus like what can we do versus what we can't feasibly do. We can't interview every single Monroe County resident because that'll take us 10 years. And it's difficult with an institution of this size. And what we strive to do, when I first started, and they're like, okay, well, our collection represents the history and culture of Monroe County. And I'm like, that is an infinite amount of things. And that can be literally like everything. So like, how do we limit that? And we have a committee that makes these discussions of donations, but it's like, it's really hard. And Yeah, we're not perfect at it, but we're trying to, I don't know. It's something that is just that's what we struggle with. That like, how do you collect something that everybody can relate to, and that's just really hard. So I wish our mandate was a little bit narrower, but how do you make that narrower without excluding someone? So we're just trying, and we don't have a budget. That's another thing. We don't have a budget to purchase items for the collection. I have no budget. So I can only ask for a donation and they can say no. So that's kind of a bummer, but that has happened. That happened with the Breaking the Color Barrier exhibit. I really wanted, like really wanted one of the items that was on display for the collection, and the donor was not ready to give it to us. So it sucks, but yeah, it's hard for an institution of the size to do exactly what we plan, but then also it's easier in some senses to do what we are supposed to do. So yeah, I don't know. It's just weird. We're just this weird thing.
Yeah. I think there are definitely pluses and negatives, and the issues of representation and storage and planning and all of those things that you're mentioning, I think those are the issues that all of these institutions face, and it's just kind of issues of scale, right? Because
yeah,
you know, even the Smithsonian, which we like to think of as having lots of resources and lots of clout and lots of visibility, they don't have infinite storage either. They're under resourced as well. It's just an issue of scale. So that makes sense. And so what you were just saying about the donations and the budget issues kind of goes to Heather Aku's question, which is here in the chat. And she asks, is everything in your collection from donations? Can you talk about how you make decisions to grow the collection in particular ways or turn down objects from people or communities that might be overrepresented? So that's kind of the other side of things. And I'd also, if you have additional things you'd like to say more about sort of specific finding, you know, targeted kinds of solicitations that you'd like to do when you find a specific object or type of object, the same way too.
Yeah, so all of the artifacts in our collection were donations to the museum. And so it's really, it's representative of people who engage with the museum. And so I would not say that that's representative of everyone in the community, because it's not. And it's also, you know, if you're willing to let go of these items. So sometimes people are not, and they have, like I mentioned with the Breaking the Color Barrier exhibit, this gentleman was not ready to let go of his items, even though they represented a wonderful piece of Monroe County's history. He wasn't ready to let it go. And so that's another instance of where we have a gap in the collection, because I can't offer to make a purchase. I'm not sure that he would, you know, sell them, but it's that's not something that I can do to, you know, perhaps encourage donation to the museum or something like that. So to make decisions to grow the collection in particular ways, it's now that I've been here for about 5 years, I've been able to really dig deep into what we've got. And it's like, it's not everything. I don't know everything, right? We have over 70,000 individual artifacts in our collection. And so I have a good sense of what we have. And I feel like I can work with our committee, our collections committee, which is all volunteers, by the way, but working with our collections committee to then target those communities and develop a sort of plan, because I can't do this by myself. And I need the help of our volunteers, our board members, other staff members to help address where I can find these artifacts and get them here. And a lot of times it takes building a relationship. So this gentleman who did not feel comfortable donating his items, we're still working on developing a relationship, and letting him know that whenever he's ready to let go of them, we would love to receive them. But we're going to leave that up to him, obviously. But it's in the case of turning down objects that are maybe from communities that are overrepresented, we do that, and it tends to be a lot of things that we have like multiples of, or very similar items in the collection. So we really and then space. So we were actually donated a dentist examining table, and I was like, we do not have space for something like that. So it's sometimes the space factor drives our decisions. We do have a finite amount of storage, so I can't, unless I decide to like sit on it at my desk, there's no way I'm gonna like fit some of these artifacts in the collection, so I'm sorry. But we do try to, if there is a case where we have multiples, then maybe we would de-accession something that's in poor condition and substitute it for the item that's in better condition. But we do try to limit, just because we don't have the space to store every single yearbook that gets donated to us and every wedding dress that gets donated. We don't have space. So the heavy hitters around here are wedding dresses, military uniforms, christening gowns, and quilts and yearbooks. Those are things that we get a lot of, and we can't keep everything. So yeah, it's difficult to make these decisions, and that's something that that's why I have a committee. I don't make these decisions myself. So I have a committee that I work with.
So kind of going off of that, and you had mentioned the need to tell stories that people see themselves in, which is important. And the things that you just mentioned, military uniforms, christening gowns, wedding dresses, yearbooks, those are all kind of those important milestone moments, right? That people, maybe they haven't all experienced those, but they're probably familiar with them, or they have somebody that they know and love who has had that. And so those feel like those touchstone things that we need to hold on to, but maybe we don't have room in our house. And there's also something special, right, about being memorialized in a museum, right? It's the forever kind of thing. And that also is a double-edged sword, where we have, like you talked about, getting stuck, right? There's that idea of being frozen, but then there's that idea of like living forever. But then what about the other side of that, with the need for a museum? In order to really be representative, you have to be able to tell stories that some people will feel very deeply resonates with them and others will not, right? But we can't really learn about our community if we don't also learn about the stories that maybe aren't our personal stories. And so what are some of the conversations and planning things that go into that, when in order to really be representative, you sometimes have to tell more specific stories that don't represent everybody? Because if we try to represent everybody, then we kind of end up representing nobody very well, right?
And that's a good point. Like there are several things with our collection that are these like touchstone moments in people's lives. And we have those represent, and that's great. But we also want to have the everyday items that we feel people can more connect to. And I never served in the military, and I can appreciate those people that did, but I am going to more connect with, like a prom dress, really, than a military uniform. And so it's important that we have just everyday clothes as well. Especially things like, people think that they have to be old in order for them to like a museum to want them, and that's not true at all. I would love to take in somebody's sneakers that they wore to this past weekend's football game that happened during a pandemic. But anyway, you get the idea. It's like I don't want to collect only things that are 50 plus years old, because we do need to connect with the future of the community as well, the young people and children. We had a few years ago, we had a really nice children's clothing exhibit, and it was really wonderful to see like the echoes in children's clothing today of what has always, like, apparently like wearing a duck overalls was like always a thing. And so it's things like that that you're like, oh my gosh, I could just like put that on my kid tomorrow. We don't want to hit just these milestones of weddings and military service and those sorts of things. We want everyday experiences so that we can add that to our collection.
And Charlotte has said in the chat that she remembers having duck overalls where the bill could lift up. So fancy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Lots
Super
of clever
fancy.
things. Yeah. And Erin Hennessy is thanking you for this insightful glimpse into the challenges and rewards of managing museum collections. Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I also had the thought, we've talked a little bit about collecting and a little bit about representation and diversifying representation. Would you be interested in saying a little bit about either some stories that you're hoping to be able to tell at the museum soon that maybe you're not quite there yet and you need those other voices, you need other input, or about things that you would like to share with community members who maybe don't see themselves reflected here yet, or this is not their place where they think about where they want to connect, things that the museum side of things that you would like to say about getting involved, or or things that you need to know still from other folks in the community, any of those kinds of things.
Yeah. So what we're really wanting to target moving forward is obviously more representation from our Black community, because the Black community really goes back to the founding of our county. And so we do know that in 1816 there were Black people in Monroe County, and so we want to make sure that we have that information. And we do. Our research library has so much information packed into such a small space, but just making sure that their stories are still here and that they're fleshed out. And in just in the same way that we pay attention to like Bill Cook, and it's like we appreciate these stories, but we really need to show people that we appreciate these stories. And we have very minimal artifacts in the collection about our Asian American community. And as you can see from the demographic slide that I had, it was estimated in 2019 that 7% of our community is Asian American, and we hardly have anything besides menus from Chinese restaurants. So that's a little like, okay, yeah, we could do better. And so we're tasking ourselves with doing better and making sure that we represent them better. It's like, I don't want someone to come into this museum and think the only Asian thing we have is a menu, from a restaurant that's frankly closed now. And it's just, that's not a great representation. So we're really working to target that community, and it's something that our board is mainly charged with doing as ambassadors for the museum in the community. That's really what our board is there for. So we're working with our board and then obviously our director to make contacts and really just start to build that trust, because we can go out and we can ask somebody like, hey, can you donate such and such, or even just loan such and such, and we'll put it in the galleries for 6 months and give it back to you. That's more tokenism than actual inclusion. And we don't want to verge on tokenism. We want to make this a real institution-wide effort to make the collections and the exhibits more diverse and accessible to everyone in our community. I actually was just processing a few weeks ago a collection from a blind individual from our community. He was completely blind. He's passed away now, but he was born completely blind. And so in the 50s and 60s, it was really wonderful to see how he navigated school. So he had originally started going to an Indianapolis school for the blind. And then his parents had decided that they wanted him to learn they wanted him to be treated as a normal child. And so they took him out of the School of the Blind and put him into the Monroe County school system. And he just had to navigate that. He went to university school, and he went to the university school summer camps. And, it's just, they did not tailor his life to the fact that he was blind. And they made sure that he had that opportunities that other children had. He just happened to be blind. And so that was a really wonderful insight into a person's life in Monroe County who's disabled. And I realized that we don't have them represented in our gallery either, because we could easily talk about Byron's story in our schoolroom exhibit. And that's just not something that we do. And so that's something that I would like to do, is like to add more stories from our disabled community and all of the initiatives that the Bloomington and Monroe County government do to make Monroe County more accessible to disabled people, add that to the collection as well. It's like there's so many stories that aren't told. We can only make a dent. We can only start and just keep working at it.
That is fantastic. Can community members also come to you with their story ideas?
Oh yeah. So I don't know every kind of person that lives in Monroe County. I'm just one person. So I love having people talk to me, email me, come to the History Center. We're open. And you can see what we have. You can talk to us about what you think we should be displaying, if you have an idea. We love to hear those kinds of things, because we can't put on our, we claim to put on our hats and we want to be the foremost authority, but that doesn't mean that we can't share that authority at times. We don't have ownership of other people's stories. We just share them. So yeah.
That is a fantastic spot for us to kind of think about that and hold on to that. Thank you again so much, Hilary. I also want to say thank you to Charlotte Forstall, who is the Institute for Advanced Studies Administrative and Project Coordinator. Charlotte makes the webinar happen. She put together the beautiful advertisement for this event, helps to get the word out, helps everything go. So many, many thanks to Charlotte as well, who is behind the scenes right now, making this all go smoothly and helped connect me with you as well. So that's great. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that we will be having the next talk in this series on November 17th at 3:30 p.m. And that will be Heather Aku, who is director of the Sage Collection, which is historic costume collection at Indiana University in the Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design. And her talk is Humanizing the 1% and the 99%, Engaging with the Sage Collection. And Charlotte has popped the registration link there into the Institute for Advanced Study comment in the chat. So feel free to click that and register. That information is also on our website, so you'll have a chance to do that afterward. Thank you so much, Hilary, for sharing your time and your experience and your expertise with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. We hope that you will join us. And as Hilary said, if you have suggestions for stories to tell, if you have suggestions for lectures for this series, topics we could cover for this or other things, please reach out to the Institute as well. If you have Monroe County kinds of stories, now you know a face and a name to go with the museum specifically, and Hilary could be a resource, or I'm sure I'm going to volunteer you, Hilary, to point people toward the right resource at the...
Yeah, that's what we do here every day.
Yeah. So thank you all very much. Take care.